What we think of as the end of his life, he no doubt thought of as his middle, the peak of his powers. In the last 4 years of his life, a time beset with depression and financial anxiety, he wrote his last 3 symphonies, concertos for piano and for clarinet, string quartets and quintets, the sublime motet Ave Vera, much incidental music and several arrangements, songs, dances, the uncompleted requiem, along with Così fan tutte, the magic flute, and La Clemenza di Tito. That he wrote those last 2 operas back-to-back and within 3 months shows how his dramatic imagination worked, riding easily between the strictures of opera seria, to which he gave a new humanity and richness, and the exuberance of the Zauberoper, the comic opera based on magic spectacle, to which he gave a new urgency. At the heart of both operas is a wise ruler, Titus and Sarastro, a figure who restores order from chaos, who counters intrigue and darkness to create a new city governed by youth and love and guided by reason. It is hard not to think Mozart was drawn to these stories because they drew on his deepest fantasies about the power of music itself. Mozart lived for scarcely 2 months after the Magic Flute was first performed in September 1791. In November, he fell ill, fearing he had somehow been poisoned. For 15 days, during his final struggle with acute rheumatic fever, his body swelled and he was racked by spells of vomiting until his sufferings ended on December 5th. The afternoon before he died, 2 of the cast members of the Magic Flute visited him and helped him work on his requiem until Mozart broke down in tears, unable to go on. Later that night, he lapsed into a delirium. The Magic Flute, into which he had poured so much life, was his refuge in death. With almost his last words whispered to his wife, he imagined that he was back in the theater, a part of the audience at a performance of his opera. His sister-in-law, Josepha Hofer, was singing the Queen of the Night's aria that you just heard. Candles were blazing, the Queen's anger was surging. "Listen," Mozart murmured. "Hofer is taking her top F. Now, how strongly she takes and holds the B flat. Hört, 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 der Mutterschwur. Hear, vengeful gods, a mother's curse." It should be noted that he was thinking of both his notes and the words, of both music and drama. It is at once the opera's darkest and its most virtuosic moment. All of Mozart's canny and humane understandings of the motives of his characters and the abilities of his singers is concentrated in this breathtakingly brilliant aria. In a sense, then, in his last moments, Mozart was listening to the power of his own music as drama. And throughout all his operas, his music is an immortal blending of passion with serene detachment, driving always towards a gloriously ascendant freedom. An impulse to freedom was the keynote of Mozart's life. Of course, one hears that in the music. The very earliest compositions are marked by febrile changes of mood within the conventional forms. And nearly all his dealings with others were dominated by his urge to be free of any authority or control other than that of his own desire to write music. In the Magic Flute, the final freedom is love itself. Some of its characters, the Queen and Monostatos, are blinded by their passions and destroyed by their anarchic instincts. In this, they are like characters in others of his operas, Electra and Osmine, and on a grander scale, Don Giovanni. Papageno, like Pedrillo and Leporello, is content with mere appetite and habit. But the flute's young lovers, Tamino and Pamina, give up their freedom for love's sake, and in doing so, discover a still greater freedom, encouraged by reason and goodness. No doubt, Constanza and Belmonte, Ilia and Idamantes, Servilia and Anius are similar pairs. We would like to think that the Count and Countess in Figaro, Mazzetto and Zerlina in Don Giovanni, and the lovers in Così will achieve the harmony they try to promise themselves. But the musical undertones encourage our suspicions. The lucky ones patiently make their own happiness. But it is important to remember that Mozart lavishes the sympathy of his musical attention on all his characters, regardless of their moral bearings. Tamino and Pamina discover that love's dependence, one on the other, husband on wife, lover on beloved, frees them of repressive jealousies and ungenerous feelings. In joining together, they are free to be themselves, and something more than themselves. The Magic Flute poignantly dramatizes their trial, the better to celebrate their victory. But then each of these operas has been a trial. Separation, deceit, appetite, corruption, and the temptations of power their protagonists must endure. Each is transformed in the process. In those who fail and in those who triumph, in those who cannot change and in those who do, we are meant to find an image of what is possible for ourselves. A few years ago, Peter Gelb asked me to make a shortened adaptation of the Magic Flute and have it be sung in English. It is a move Mozart would have endorsed. All of Mozart's earlier operas had been written for gilded court theaters filled with polite, bewigged aristocrats. The Magic Flute, on the other hand, was written for a commercial theater accustomed to staging farces and operettas rigged with stage machineries to make spectacular effects and thronged with the common people. And that has been its home ever since around the world. For more than 2 centuries, its unique combination of the sublime and the ridiculous has worked its theatrical magic. Farce and symbolism, fairy tale adventures, and obscure Masonic lore succeed one another in a dizzying sequence that never fails to convince and captivate. As it has from the start, the opera enchants both the novice and the sophisticate, the child and the connoisseur. One of the first children to see the opera was Mozart's 7-year-old son, Karl, who went with his father to one of the early performances. Mozart wrote to his wife that the boy was absolutely delighted. 3 years later, no less a figure than Goethe, enthralled by the music's sublimity and compassion, had the opera performed at the Court Theater in Weimar and began a sequel to it. Even the dour and lofty Beethoven later claimed that, quote, Mozart's greatest work remains the Magic Flute. It can truly be said that no opera has a more universal appeal. My new adaptation of Julie Taymor's marvel-filled production has become a holiday favorite, and a new round of performances starts at the Met on December 21st. I hope you'll have a chance to see it. Here is one of the opera's funniest and saddest moments. Our beloved birdcatcher Papageno, unable to fulfill the rigorous requirements to complete the prince's quest, and worse, unable to find himself a wife or even a sweetheart, decides it is time to hang himself. Imagine a tree right here, a noose dangling from one limb. Here is John Moore and Natalia Kachikova to perform Papageno's suicide aria.
Papagena, Papagena, Papagena. Cheeky, darling, little lovebird, it's useless. She's lost forever. I guess I was not meant to have her. By nattering, chattering, I lost my chance. So that's the end of my romance. That's the end of my romance. I will decorate this tree with a hang of parts of me. I am sorry I was born. Tell the pretty girls to mourn. Everyone wants to mistreat me. There's no little wife to greet me. So this is it. It's time to die. Lovely ladies, think of me. Lovely ladies, say goodbye. Is my face just one big puddle? Aren't I cute enough to cuddle? Oh, speak up before you know. Say the word, well, yes or no. Say the word, well, yes or no. Not a warble, not a twitter. No one quacks up. Then I guess it's time to pack up. Papageno, there's the tree. That news has its eye on me. Papageno, there's the tree. Fate says what must be, must There's one more chance. Let's see. I'll wait a while. Then, let's see. Why don't I count from 1, 2, 3. 1! 2. 2.5. 3. Well, I guess it's meant to be. This is it, the bitter end. Now the time has come to die. Oh, you heartless world, goodbye. Oh, you heartless world, goodbye.